Welcome to Cult Connections. Let's see what we are taking a sideways look at today.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Cult Connections podcast. As always, I am your host Ian. I have a very special episode this week. It's actually second time they're lucky, hopefully. However, I think the best way to talk about the theme of this episode is to actually introduce their guest. So I'm going to start with Antonio. How are you, Antonio?
Excellent, Ian. Thanks for having me back on again and again.
Indeed, again. Antonio, what is the name of your podcast?
So I got the two. My first podcast is the Cultworthy Podcast, which is my exposure show where I do reviews and kind of like exposure episodes of films that were either underseen, underrated, and deserve a cult-worthy audience. Maybe they didn't get enough notoriety to become cult-worthy during their time, but that's what this podcast is for. And then my other show is the Cult-Worthy Classic, where I talk about cult-worthy classic films made before 1970 that I feel are influential in either cult film or mainstream film of today. And that's my guested show, which you've been on. We did Detour together on that show. And yeah, it's a fun one. That's the one that's more of like a hour-long deep dive that I do every week.
Good. Yeah, and it's a great show as well. I absolutely loved doing the Detour, which was an absolutely cracking film. So that was really, really great. Now, my second guest is Chris. How are you, Chris?
Doing very well, Ian. Thank you. Thank you for having me on again.
Again, yes, indeed. This is, like I said, this is our second time they're doing this one. Chris, what's the name of your podcast?
I'm the host of the Cult Film Companion podcast. We are home of the movies that are off, under, and ahead of the cinematic radar. So we cover movies. I'm a firm believer that a cult movie, because it's such a loose kind of definition, can come from pretty much any time period, any film director, any movie company. And it's just that these movies have, I would say, have lasted longer than their shelf life or their expiration date. They're still talked about to this day, and for whatever reason, the love for these movies, is still there, and people are passionate about them. People love to talk about them. People love to rewatch them. And I mean, the most recent movie that I've ever covered on the show was from 2005, because I think you need some time to build up and establish a cult following. And every once in a while, we'll highlight what we think are going to be future cult movies, because that's kind of it's once you watch enough cult movies, you can kind of see movies that don't really make a big splash, but you could say I can see people coming back to this. Maybe it wasn't the right time for this movie, and all time periods, all genres, just all across the board. And we do weekly deep dives into movies. And I have a regular co-host, and I love having guests on, like Antonio. By the time this gets posted, Antonio's episode with me covering Caligula will have been posted. So looking forward to that. Always great collaborating with such fine minds like you two gentlemen. So
well, thank you very much, Chris, and absolutely great film there to cover as well. It's definitely lots to talk about on that one. So we have three cult film their podcasts. Obviously, on my show, we like to talk about three things of the episodes, so it makes sense that we have all brought one cult film to their table, as it were. I'm going to start with you, Antonio, because geographically you are furthest away from me. So, what is your film?
So the film that I brought to this show was 1974's The Gravy Train, aka The Dion Brothers. And this has been known as a very obscure, hard to find film. it didn't have a huge theatrical release, and it was never really supported on home video. There's never been an official home video or DVD or Blu-ray release. So it's one of those films that either played like at Grindhouse or drive-ins, and you were lucky to find it on cable. So I sent you all the link a while ago. You can find it on YouTube, and it was like a Cinemax rip that someone ripped off the Cinemax and put on YouTube. And ever since our last conversation, it's now appearing on the Vudu streaming app, which I haven't watched that version, but I'm planning on it because it's probably better than the one that we saw. But it's the story of these two brothers played by Stacy Keach and Frederick Forrest in probably my favorite performances of both of those actors in a film that was directed by Jack Starrett, and he did Ride with the Devil, and he also was most probably known as an actor in Blazing Saddles. He played Gabby Johnson, the mumbling mountain man. And he just was like this really great Hollywood character. And this film, I think, is his best directed film, yet it is the one that is the least known. So, yeah, I brought this to the table. You guys had a chance to check it out. What did you all think of it?
Well, I really liked it. I didn't really know what to get from the film, so I hadn't heard of it. I wasn't aware of it at all. So, looking at it nice and sort of fresh, and I was really surprised because it's a fun film. There's lots going on, but it has they're serious, their sort of moments as well. There's some quite sort of moving sort of parts with the film as well. And I think for me, what probably stood out is as a cult film that there is a big name. They're linked to this film. He's not actually like they're sort of credited on it, but it's a very well known and well they're uh, they're they're sort of well thought of their film their maker as well. So it was actually fascinating looking at it from that sort of side as well.
How about you, Chris?
I absolutely adored this movie. I'm so glad. I'm so glad that it's on Vudu now, that more people can check it out. I mean, we all had to watch it on YouTube. Well, at least I had to watch it on the YouTube, the Cinemax rip. Which, yeah, I mean, it wasn't terrible quality. I've seen far worse on YouTube, but I mean, this is a movie that I think I stated. I'm just very surprised that some company hasn't come along and picked this up to throw it out there. Kino Lorber or Vinegar Syndrome or somebody, because this movie, just wow. Like, this movie is so much fun. It's very serious, but I mean, Stacy Keach is just amazing in this movie. The whole premise of the movie, I love a good heist gone wrong film. So this was right up my alley, and I just love the chemistry between him and Frederick Forrest plays his brother, correct?
Yeah.
Their chemistry, they feel like brothers. Just the way they talk to their mom, the way they talk to each other, they kind of have that inside lingo that brothers establish over time. Their chemistry is just like it should be. You gotta watch. This should be like seen in acting classes. Like, this is what genuine chemistry. If you're playing brothers, this is the way that brothers. Having grown up with two brothers, this is the way brothers. They rag on each other, but then it's not harsh. It's all in good fun. I mean, sometimes you look at Stacy Keach and the things that come out of Frederick Forrest's mouth. He kind of like he knows
What are
that
you
it's
talking about?
yeah. He's like, really? That's but like, you could tell that there's a lot of love there, a lot of true brotherly love there, and also Margot Kidder is great in this movie.
Yeah. So, like, the basic plot structure of this film is Stacy Keach is like working in a cannery. His brother Russell, played by Frederick Forrest, is in a coal mine. They come from very meager beginnings, very, very low means. But Stacy Keach is a dreamer, and he's got just this like can't stop him attitude. and he just up and quits his job at the cannery, which is a great opening scene. And Ian, you said last time your favorite line in the movie was one of the opening lines of the movie from Stacy Keach. Do you want to touch on that one for a second?
Yeah, definitely. So as you say, he's working the line in the sort of cannery. He obviously hates his job. Uh, he's on the verge of their snapping. I think he takes his shirt off and he's they're sort of gesturing, and he has this great line. So he's flexing his their muscles, and he just goes, "Kirk fucking Douglas."
Kirk fucking Douglas. I mean, just what a great way to introduce our main character, so to speak. And he's got these plans where he wants to open up the best seafood restaurant in Washington, D.C. called the Blue Grotto. He has no means to do it, so he comes along and he picks up his brother Russell, who pretty much would follow him into like the bowels of hell if he had to. And they've linked up with this like little low-key crime syndicate where they're going to rob an armored car, and once they split the money, they're going to open up this restaurant. But of course, they're double-crossed, things go wrong, things go terribly wrong. And that's what kind of like what Chris was talking about, the chemistry of these brothers. Rarely do you see a film where you have such optimistic protagonists where absolutely nothing goes right. I mean, they can get double crossed, they can get almost killed, they can have their money taken, yet they approach everything like with this positive, no nonsense attitude that just really builds this film. Because it could be a really dark film if it wasn't for the way these two were written and the way that they played the film. And when we talk about what you were saying, Ian, that connection of this film is that this film was originally written by Terrence Malick. It was like a college project of his. So it's really funny to see a film like this that has so much like vibrancy and witty dialogue from the guy that went on to make like these kind of like serious toned films like Badlands and The Thin Red Line and just The Tree of Life. Such humble beginnings with this film. It's just really fascinating to look into the history of that guy.
It doesn't, you don't. I, I don't get a sense or starting out. I don't get a sense of this being a sort of typical the Malick film, but he is actually. But the film tells the story of the very humble their sort of characters. These are ordinary. They're sort of guys, working their guys, and they are striving for their sort of dream, as it were, which is a very their sort of American their story, isn't it? About hard work, and you will get what you want out of life. Obviously, it doesn't quite go how they would like it, but I can sort of definitely see sort of Malick type sort of themes in it.
I was gonna say, after rewatching this and then rewatching Badlands, I can see similar kind of. I mean, because Martin Sheen's character in Badlands, uh, he's a trash man,
Yeah.
and he falls in love with Sissy Spacek, and they're off. They're kind of looking for their own version of the American dream. And there's some quippy kind of lines in Badlands. Later, Malick, I could see, well, there's a total disconnect between something like the Dion brothers. But I could see, I would say that I can see Malick's writing in the Dion brothers, because it is. I don't know if any of it was improvised or anything, but just some of the lines and some of the comedic timing, particularly with Stacy Keach and Frederick Forrest, is just so on point. And I love the aspects of the American dream. Frederick Forrest is getting ready for his job, and there's a commercial that comes on. No, he's watching like an infomercial. He's watching the news, and some big wig is talking about how you can buy the American dream, but you just make sure that you don't miss any payments. And that line.
And that's actually the director Jack Starrett playing that role.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
That's a great line. Then he just flicks mashed potatoes at the screen. It's
I think it's
So,
a
yeah.
film that works there visually as well. I think there's lots sort of visually going on. There's lots of action. Actually, it's quite action packed in many ways. Obviously, it's that there is the sort of heist element, and there's a siege, and then there's the sort of standoff at the end. So for you guys, what's your favourite of that? What's your favourite sort of the set sort of piece in the film?
Well, I mean, like I think we're all going to talk about the great shootout at the end that is just unappreciated. Like, why isn't this being shown in like trailers of action scenes or compilation videos? It's so amazing. But the director Jack Starrett, he knew how to make an action scene work. If you've seen Race with the Devil, he was doing like Mad Max style vehicular combat before George Miller was. Like, it's a great film, high pace, a lot of action. He does this. Like, he's got a great armed robbery scene. He's got a great standoff scene where they're in like the apartment complex as the cops are trying to come in, and the boys utilize a stick of dynamite to escape this police siege, and one of the most fascinating scenes I've ever seen using a stick of dynamite. But of course, it's got to be the shootout scene at the end in a building that's about to be demolished, and it's literally falling apart. It's literally collapsing as they are doing this final moment. I mean, an amazing set piece, an amazing concept, and brilliantly executed. Yeah, I'd say those pieces 100%. And Chris, what
yeah.
did you think?
I was going to say, I'm going to reiterate what I said the first time we did this. I'm surprised that more people haven't ripped off this climax to have a wrecking ball. A wrecking ball is going through this building. The floors are just falling, and this shootout is just amazing. But I have to go. I think that my favorite just kind of set piece is after the heist. It's the two brothers, and then the other character's name escapes me. He's the big tough guy.
Rex, Denny Miller.
Rex. Yeah. Um, that whole scene played out through them escaping, dressed up as cops. That whole little set piece is just brilliant. Their whole little I like that this apartment scene where they're waiting for the money to show up. Rex is just kind of being Rex, being big and tall. Frederick Forrest is sitting on the couch playing with his gun like he's a cowboy. Stacy Keach is like, you could just feel the anxiety growing within him. Like I said previously, it just feels like a little like one act play to me. That the three of them waiting there, the dialogue is so good. Their characters are all dealing with this tension as it grows, and then it leads to the police siege, and then like you said, that the escape to the next apartment building with a stick of dynamite, Rex jumping out of the building, just
In a hail of gunfire.
splat on the pavement, and then them eventually getting police uniforms and walking out through the rest of the cops, and they're asked like a bunch of they're like, "Where are your helmets?" They're like, "We weren't given any helmets." They're like, "Well, go put your helmets on then." It's so funny. And then I mean that's what I love about a movie like this. It's a lot of fun, but like when it's serious, it's serious. And yeah, those two set pieces, those action set pieces, especially the climax, is just something that you just need to see. It's just so amazingly shot. It's choreographed so well. The editing is beautiful. And yeah, I just like movies from this time before we got into that rapid fire editing of like
Of the 80s.
There has to be a cut like every 3 seconds. It's just, I don't know. I like when a scene breathes, and I like when characters get to talk, to interact, and just like have the camera sit there. Maybe subtle movements here and there, but for the most part, just put the camera on and let the actors act. And that's kind of why I like that scene. And I also particularly like the scene in the restaurant.
The restaurant.
They have just stolen this money, and they go to have the nicest meal that they can have, and
They
they're
order
tipping
everything off
every
the menu.
pretty much it, yeah, and they're tipping everyone that comes up to them. Like, I'll be your server. I'll be the
Here's
guy with the
here's
wine
$100.
list. I'll be. All of them are getting flip money. It's just a brilliant movie. And I'm glad that it's available now on Vudu. For hopefully more people will check it out because, yeah, if it wasn't for you, Antonio, I probably never would have heard of this movie.
Yeah, and like I said last time, I heard about it because I read in an Entertainment Weekly like 20 something years ago that it was one of Tarantino's favorite movies, and he actually wanted to remake it, but that never really happened. And then the director David Gordon Green, it's one of his favorite movies too. And so when you watch Pineapple Express, I feel there's a lot of kind of like character influence between Seth Rogen and James Franco having like their little bits of dialogue and the way they kind of play off each other. If you see this movie, you can definitely see what that filmmaker was going for with those two characters, because there is kind of like a of mice and men kind of Lenny idea to this film, where like Russell, he's not as simple as Lenny is, but he's definitely not as aware of the world as Stacy Keach's character is. So there is a little bit of that, but it plays differently because Russell actually comes up with a lot of brilliant ideas throughout this film, completely unintentionally, but it makes him like kind of save the day, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I think the the character pieces in their work so well, and not just in the bigger characters. I think in some of the much more minor ones as well. So certainly for me, and in that final set their piece, amidst all of their sort of chaos going on, there's actually one their character who really stands out, and I'm just going to mention him as the chicken there, guy. So I don't really want to say much more than that. Just go off and watch the film, and you'll meet the chicken there, guy,
The
and
Chicken
you'll
Man.
just absolutely love it because it's absolutely brilliant.
I always there's always been talk with Tarantino. He wanted to do something like the Vega brothers, because he has characters that I guess from Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction are supposed to be brothers.
Yeah, Vincent Vega and Vic Vega from Reservoir. So Michael Madsen and Travolta, he wanted to do like
Right.
a prequel, and that again never happened. But he's talked about maybe doing a novel since he's almost done directing.
Yeah. I wonder if like that idea for like having these brothers came from the Dion brothers, something like that.
You know, I've never put that together. That's a brilliant assumption.
Thank you. And again, it's nothing more than an assumption. But yeah, it kind of I could see that, and I could see that this is the kind of movie that Tarantino would really like. The writing is very, very smart. The jokes are more clever than actually than you think some of them are. But just yeah, I just I love a good heist movie gone wrong. So this one was right up my alley, and hopefully some company will put out a nice edition of it for those of us that still collect physical media.
Fingers
um,
crossed.
yeah, hopefully a nice little way to move on to the next film. Actually, so obviously, the Taran the Tino obviously worked a few times with Harvey, the Keitel, and he turns up in your film there, Chris. So would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
I'd love to. My movie is Blue Collar from 1978, written by Paul Schrader and his brother Leonard, and it is Paul Schrader's directorial debut. And Schrader was best known for, at the time, for writing Taxi Driver and also a movie I just happened to watch last night called The Yakuza, which he wrote with Robert Towne, which is a one that I'm going to eventually have to cover. Great screenwriter. His directing is kind of hit and miss. But when he hits hard, and Blue Collar hits hard. Again, we're going back to the American dream. We have our three protagonists in this movie. We have Harvey Keitel, we have Richard Pryor in his best dramatic performance, my opinion, and Yaphet Kotto, who I guess I best known for being in the original Alien, and I know he's been in a lot of other movies. They're just escaping me at the moment. But we have three.
He was in a lot of the blaxploitation films, and he was in the Roger Moore Live and Let Die. He was a villain of that one.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you, because I know that he gets. Yeah, I should have given him more credit than I didn't look up his filmography. I've seen him in so many things, but the three of them, we got three powerhouse leads, and we could talk a little bit about the problems behind the scenes. But basically, we have three people that work at a car factory in Detroit, Michigan, and they're kind of getting fed up with their union. Poor Richard Pryor, his fingers coming off because he keeps having to grab his locker because the locker's broken, and they're all getting fed up one way or another, and they decide to rob their own union, and which is the biggest, I guess, silly comedic part of the movie is their disguises for when they rob the union. There is comedy sprinkled throughout. It's pretty dark. I would say this is more of a drama. And again, the promotion we can talk about because it was kind of promoted more like a comedy because it's Richard Pryor, and I think that kind of, turn some people off. But what happens is they find out that their union is involved with the mafia, and that leads to all sorts of problems for all three of them. And again, I'd much rather have people watch this movie with the least bit of knowledge going in, but it's three powerful performances from three leads. And again, Harvey Keitel is always great, as is Yaphet Kotto. But as far as a dramatic turn for Richard Pryor, this is it. Like, his acting in this movie is just stellar. Like, should have been nominated for something, best supporting actor, something. But it's kind of gained a cult following because Paul Schrader has gone on to some great acclaim, and he's finally getting recognized. I think his movie First Reformed, it came out several years ago, was nominated for, I think, best original screenplay. But he's written some truly amazing movies for Scorsese and for himself, and this one I think kind of gets lost in the shuffle. I always I have a thing on my show too where I always kind of go back to the first movie that a director did to kind of get a feel for where they're coming from. It's very interesting to look back at some, the where these directors came from. So this was his first direct movie that he directed. So I just get a kick out of it. It's I know, Ian, you had trouble relating to it because of the American unions, but
a little bit. I think certainly unions in the UK are generally not. They're sort of corrupt, as it were. They generally do work for their members, really well. And actually, dare I say it, and I don't want to they sort of disparage any of your um any of your work and sort of practices over there, guys. But like because of sort of unions in the UK, we have good healthcare, like sort of sick sort of pay when you're not well. That's far better than what you guys get. There's sort of holidays as well. We have a lot better holidays. Just all kinds of stuff, and that's because our unions actually genuinely want what's best for the members. And Now, I'm not saying that sort of unions are perfect, but we don't really have, say, sort of Jimmy Hoffa type sort of figures either. They're not really, they're not really over here. So, an interesting sort of take for me to think that, the body that should actually, represent their members and actually do their best for them, end up actually ripping them off. And um, in one sort of instance, actually, they're sort of killing one of the main sort of characters. It's yeah.
I mean, we're talking about unions a lot more these days in the States because, like, they just had the first union organization at an Amazon packing plant, like an Amazon warehouse where they send parcels out. So you're starting to hear that kind of talk again with all these big companies and industries where unions were kind of like bashed, and now people are kind of fighting to have them again. But at this time when this film came out, there was like this kind of weird, like, city of industry and industrial just unions not representing their workers fairly. The same year that this film came out, Norma Ray came out with Sally Field, which pretty much tackled kind of the same subject. And then, like, he was talking about, like, the mob connections of the unions that are mentioned in this movie. If you watch Martin Scorsese's Casino, you find out that the Teamster pension funds that all of these union workers' money goes into is what was funding these casinos that were run by these crime organizations. So it's interesting, like, there were all these connections between how these large corporations worked, and although the unions were built to, like, keep workers from being exploited, you're always going to find some way to kind of, like, jimmy the system and make money off of it, which was the point. And to Chris's talk about Richard Pryor's performance, Richard Pryor has the biggest character arc in this film because he does start off as one of these passionate union workers that wants better representation, even if it means that he will run for a spot and take over the local rep. But what does that power and control actually do to someone when they actually get that role and that control? It's such a great dynamic of how these characters work together with their different character arcs. And like he was saying, man, the marketing of this movie just sucked. Like, the poster, as he had brought up in the last time we recorded, is literally two pictures of Richard Pryor, one of him laughing and one of him upset. If you were going to a film having not seen the trailer or not read the reviews and you just are going off the poster, yeah, you would think that this was a film about Richard Pryor and it was a comedy. And then you go in there and having one of the most gripping dramas you've seen of the 70s. Yeah, I can see why it did not get the recognition it deserved.
I looked at that poster earlier, and it is truly awful, isn't it? It really does not sort of represent the film there whatsoever.
This is the copy that I is most currently available. So
I see, that's
it's
better.
a little bit better, but there's no Yaphet Kotto.
Yeah,
There's another edition where there's the three of them. But again, the marketing with this movie, if you're listening to us and you haven't seen this movie, do not watch the trailer first, because the trailer ends with the last scene of this movie, which I just think is, I know it happens, but particularly in a movie like this, the ending of this movie is so powerful. You get this, I'm not going to spoil it, but the ending is so powerful. The fact that the ending is in the trailer just completely is such a disservice to the movie as a whole. And the marketing was just a mess because they didn't know how to. And again, this is something that comes up a lot on my show. I'm like, these are not movies that I would want to have to market, because the span of genres and the span of tones it's all over the place. It's like, how do you properly market something like this?
And reading about the film as well, and a lot of the things that sort of came up was that Schrader, when he was trying to get their sort of funding for it, and he was talking to their sort of executives and money men about it, and he was like, it's two black guys and one white guy. And they're all like, no, no, surely you mean, two they're white guys and one they're black guy. And he's like, no,
Oh
I
God.
don't. Because, perish the thought back then that you would ever have that, of course.
Right.
One thing I'm really struck by, actually, and at the start of the film, the three main characters, they're really, they're sort of tight, they're good friends. Um, they're obviously friends at work, but out with work at the bar, they are mixing, and there's no racial sort of tension. There's nothing like that. But as the film goes on, and the characters actually get their sort of divided, then those things that were sort of bonding them, they start to fall apart. And the final sort of scenes, really powerful, and you see, oh my god, these characters have sort of changed so much. Um, I find that really, really good, really, really, really powerful.
You watched their friendship disintegrate before your eyes, under the manipulation. Once this once they realized what they actually got, because they didn't get a lot of money when they robbed the union, when they kind of put the pieces together, what they could do with this. Unbeknownst to them, the union is operating very much like the mafia, and they have files on all of their workers, and they already have pinpointed like personality traits for each one that they know they can manipulate. And then they single out the one character. I won't spoil. They single out one character to like, well, this person we're not going to be able to manipulate. So they set up, basically it's a mob hit in this car factory, which is, I mean, it's an intense scene. But then we just watch this friendship fall apart. They even have a conversation out in the parking lot, and they were just like, the three of us can never be seen together, because they know that it was two black guys and one white guy that robbed the union. So like, the three of us, we can't hang out anymore. And it's just kind of like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
like, because you like the three of them together. They have such a great dynamic. We spend so much time in the first half of the movie. There's a very it's interesting because there's a hardcore party scene with the three of them and a bunch of women, and then you have like the sobering aftermath, the morning after, the three of them just on the couch talking and like just bearing their souls to one another about like, I have to work on my day off, or I have to work like when I'm supposed to be on vacation. I can't afford to get my kids braces. Like, I have to pay all these taxes because the IRS is up my back. That there's a very powerful scene, just the three of them sitting there on the couch together, and it's kind of like the morning after this great party that they all had, a whole lot of fun, a lot of drugs, a lot of women, and then they're all kind of like, it's just three raw nerves just like
Mm-hmm.
connecting, and just like, it's just brilliant. But I know behind the scenes there was a lot of tension on this movie. Paul Schrader, who has a history of substance abuse, he was introduced to cocaine by someone behind the scenes, like the production manager or someone. They were like, well, how do you get movies like done? How do you stay focused? Like, how do you keep your energy up? And it was like, oh, we got this great little powder here called cocaine. Again, this is the 70s, so it's just like, cocaine was everywhere. Richard Pryor had relapsed. He was clean when he first started doing the movie, ended up relapsing on crack cocaine or just cocaine. Pulled a gun on Schrader at one point because he was tired of doing so many takes. There was fights. There was a lot of yelling, and it kind of all stemmed from maybe it was a rookie mistake on Schrader's part, but he kind of promised all three of the men, Keitel, Pryor, and Kodo. He kind of all promised them that they were the leads, and it's very much an ensemble piece with the three of them. And basically what he said, because he had put it out to them that way, basically what he ended up with was three bulls raging in a china shop. So can only imagine to be a fly in the wall for some of those behind the scenes moments. I mean, imagine nowadays. I mean, we just had this whole Will Smith slapped Chris Rock kind of thing. Imagine, somebody pulled an actual gun on a director behind the scenes. Like in the 70s, it was kind of like, I don't know if that made headlines or not. Probably not. It probably came out after the fact. But I mean, my God, just imagine that happening today. So
Yeah.
I think though, and from what we see so many times out of the sort of chaos, as it were, a great sort of film is actually made, and I think that there's so many films like that, isn't there? So yeah, it's definitely in that their sort of tradition. I think as well, it's what stands out for me is that it tells a story that is not sort of typical, their sort of Hollywood there at all. Even in the their sort of 70s, where there was a drive towards more their sort of gritty work. There isn't a huge amount of films about working class their guys. Just trying to keep them and their families' heads above their sort of water, as it were. So actually, to make a film like this, testament actually to their sort of Schrader for saying, well, this is a story that I want there to tell. So
it
And
was a
I think
very
it's funny.
person. Oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry. Oh,
No,
I was
please,
just
you.
gonna say, I I knew it was a very personal story for him. I believe his father had worked in the union, so he actually went to Detroit to talk to union workers, and he got a lot of the dialogue and a lot of the story from talking to these union workers who were getting real fed up with the way that they were being treated and the way that things were handled, and you know, so I mean, but like you said, that's not going to be something that you want to see. Like, does a it's kind of weird because like as a blue collar person, like, do you want to go see more blue collar people for your night out at entertainment at a theater? It's kind of a hard sell with people. But I think that it spoke to so many different people. I know that both Spike Lee and Bruce Springsteen have both named this as like their favorite movie from the 70s, if not their favorite. Like it's on their top five. But that's just like the variety. I mean, because Bruce Springsteen's always been the blue collar hardworking man, um, and then Spike Lee, I think, was just a fan of which a lot of people are of just Richard Pryor's performance in this movie.
Hmm.
He gets some very very funny lines, but it's not the kind of Richard Pryor humor that you would see in some of the more over the top performances or with his collaborations with Gene Wilder, stuff like that. Um, Very grounded, very street level humor that is very reminiscent of his stand up work. Um, but I mean, his acting in this movie is just it's on a next level. Like it is just amazing to me. And Keitel too has this one scene that always stuck with me. This that really pushes him over the edge is that there's this little scene and that his daughter's really upset because she's getting made fun of at school because she needs braces, and she decides to try to make braces herself, and she ends up cutting up her mouth. And the fact that he can't buy his little girl braces is like you could see the heartbreak on his face. That he is just like he'll do any like he wants to do anything he can for his family. He's working two jobs. Again, all of them are devoted, with the exception of Yaphet Kottos, who doesn't have a family. They're both very devoted to their families. Richard Pryor is extremely devoted to his family, and to Ian, what you were saying, we don't get it's interesting because the racial tension slowly escalates towards the end of this movie because they start out and they're three friends and they just see themselves as three friends. They don't start to see color until the end of this movie where they're kind of pitted against each other. Particularly Pryor and Keitel have some very intense scenes with one another. Kind of like, why my family and not your family, and that kind of stuff. And it's a powerful movie. Don't go into it thinking that it's a comedy just because it's got Richard Pryor or that ridiculous poster that Antonio brought up. The generic red poster is a complete. That's just so misleading. So misleading.
Yeah.
So like
yeah,
one of the things
definitely.
I pointed out last time is I think it's funny because I said that Office Space from 1999 was kind of like the Silicon Valley version of this film, where you've got like these three main characters who work for a corporation they're not happy with, and they decide to rip it off. And how they do it is they essentially take the plot of Superman 3, starring Richard Pryor, where they're like stealing micro pennies at a time. So it's similar to the heist of the Union in this film. So it's almost like the comedic, I'm gonna say, I don't want to say rip off, maybe like the comedic
Homage.
alliteration or homage to Blue Collar, but not a lot of people have seen Blue Collar, so that could be a double feature. It's like watch Blue Collar, then watch Office Space.
Oh yeah.
Well,
And the
actually,
fact-
that's a great point there to make. And actually a good way just to move on to our final film, because we are so just you have mentioned Superman there 3, and our next film is actually they're directed by the same director as Superman 3, so this is a good way to move on now. So we've covered two quite similar stories in a way. So two their American films focusing on their ordinary men, ordinary people, and the struggles that they have. And I've picked a fairly similar film, I would say. No, actually, I've not. However, I could have. However, I could have picked a very their sort of gritty, their sort of kitchen sink, their drama is what we call sort of British films of a similar theme. Or I could have gone for, say, one of our lavish, their sort of costume, their sort of dramas, which are very, very popular. However, I have gone for a very, their sort of British film, but absolutely different from the two that we have there spoken about. So I'm going to go with 969's The Bed, their sitting room. Is this a film that you guys knew?
I watched this a few weeks before you mentioned it, strictly because I saw the poster, the cover art on Paramount Plus, and I was like, oh, I recognize these names and some British comedic names, and the fact that it was directed by Richard Lester, and I had just gone on a Hard Day's Night and Help double feature a few weeks earlier, so that's when I watched it. So it was really interesting that you brought it up. I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen this. Let's talk about this. What about you, Chris?
I had seen this, I think, about maybe 10 years ago. It had come out, I think, it had finally come out on DVD and Blu-ray. For a while there, it was very, very hard to get. I think it was the British Film Institute, the BFI, I think,
Mm-hmm.
had put it out, and somebody recommended it to me because they knew that I was a big fan of Monty Python. And I don't want to get too much into the Monty Python comparisons, but they're like, if you like that kind of surreal, absurdist humor, this is kind of, I mean, it was quoted to me as being Monty Python after the apocalypse. Was kind of how it was, um, and that was kind of like all I needed
Yeah.
to pick up a copy. I was just like, okay, I can get behind that. That's something I want to see. And I had also we had talked previously on the episode, we talked about how actually, Antonio, you had briefly dropped out, so me and Ian were talking about Richard Lester and how we think that Superman 3 gets a lot of undue hate. I actually happen to like the tone of Superman 3 that Richard Lester did. So I've been a fan of his work, and going back to one of his earlier movies, it's I don't even know how to summarize this movie, because there's not so much of a plot. So maybe Ian, you could fill us in on kind of what the plot
I,
of this is.
I wouldn't. To be fair, I wouldn't really say that there is much of a plot. It's a series of um, there's sort of vignettes which are basically set in a post their sort of nuclear their London or surrounding their London. Like I say, very their sort of surrealist sort of comedy. Definitely, if you do know sort of Python, then it is quite similar in a way. Of course, this does sort of precede Python, um, and it's actually based on a play by Spike the Milligan, who you might not know, but he was a member of the Goons, and they were huge over here. So the Goons had a the radio show which was absolutely massive. That was in the 50s. They Peter their Sellers. He was part of that. He came out of the Goons.
Oh, great.
Absolutely huge their show, and still very much loved. It's still sort of listened to a lot. Um, all of the members on it went on to write and star in lots of their sort of comedies and their sketches and all kinds of stuff. So Spike the Milligan wrote this. He's in many other films. He did his own their TV work and their sort of books and everything. So very much a British. They're a much loved British. They're sort of comedian, and um, it did very much influence their Pythons as well. They will all say that this was very much a a their sort of group, and also a group of their sort of actors as well who are in it, who are sort of you know, their comedy. Their mainstays as well. I mean, these are people that British audiences we all sort of well, or if you're a certain age anyway, like I am, but you recognise practically everyone in this film from there's something else that they've done. So, um, but yeah, it is hard to sort of sum up though. You have to watch the film to really get a sort of flavour of it.
I just love how this movie opens. It's just like, this is World War III. It lasted how long? To 3
Yeah, I
minutes or
think
something.
yeah, two
2
two and
minutes
a
and
half
30
minutes.
seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And
then we
it
get
may have been 3 or 4 years ago.
right. Then that's for the anniversary, and they've got the 20 remaining residents who are just trying to get by, trying to go about their normal business. There's so many characters to love. The BBC guy with the cutout television,
Yeah.
the family that rides around in the train, where the father gets out and stamps his work card, goes back in. His wife's like, "Oh, I had a short day of work today," did you? Something like that. The escalator that goes to nowhere, and then the mutations that start happening, which we should probably talk about. Hence the title, "The Bed Sitting Room." Just a genius
Yeah.
kind of thing.
I mean, this is it. Ralph, the Richardson's character, he physically turns into a bed sitting room, which is a one bedroom their sort of apartment. It's a one room their sort of apartment. He physically that's what he there turns in there too. So other characters walk into him, and you can hear his voice because he is this room. There another character turns into their wardrobe. Um, yeah, it's they're surreal, but I think as well it's I'm not going to say that there's a hugely serious side, but there is an almost a sort of British blitz, their spirit that comes out of it. So it is the end of the world. The bomb has dropped. Practically nothing that exists. It's a proper wasteland. However, the BBC is still going. So one man walks around with a empty their sort of television their screen, and he sits they're sort of behind it, and he is the BBC. The train's running, so the underground is still there running. It's powered by a man on his um, um, their bike. They're pedaling along, but that's powering the underground. The national health is still sort of going in some form. So um, yeah, I think that's what we like to think of as this British their spirit, and that would still go on even though there was absolutely nothing left.
And you still have the police. You still have the police and their hot air balloons.
Yeah,
You've got
exactly.
Dudley Moore and Peter Cook as the police, just shouting down, tell people knock it off. Yeah, even
Right.
exactly what you said. What you said about this whole thing is like that keep calm, carry on mentality that was so prevalent then and still prevalent now for the most part. That is kind of like this film in a nutshell. It's kind of like playing on that in that satirical fashion. And we had talked about us who knew Python before this film and not knowing like the references or like to the goons and stuff like that. When I first saw this, I was like, this is like something that Graham Chapman and John Cleese would have written, because it takes that satirical approach on not only like the little bit of like the snobbish members of like British society and how they still kind of have like final say of things in this post-apocalyptic world where no one really owns anything, but also just the idea that like to have such detailed and academia humor in the writing, specifically like the fact that the war lasted only 2 minutes and 30 seconds and that it happened 3, maybe 4 years ago. It's that kind of like little ambiguity, but also the attention to detail that we saw in Python writing that really made me enjoy this, because yeah, it's kind of like the breeding ground for the stuff that we became fans of with Python in the States. And to see like that, you said the Goons and Spike Milligan were huge influences on Graham Chapman and John Cleese. Yeah, it all makes sense. It's almost as if you're looking at the spawning pool for those writers and those minds from a film like this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would be amazed to see what the actual stage version's like, because it is a very elaborate film. I mean, their sort of location looks sort of great in a post-apocalyptic way. I'm not quite sure how they would have managed to actually do that on their stage, although I can kind of work it out. It features a whole host of their British their talent. I mean, there is their Arthur Lowe, who all of their Britain knows as their captain, their Mandarin from Dad's the army. Obviously, Michael Hordern, he was the voice of their Paddington. So if you grew up, I mean, he is their sort of Paddington Bear for us. Like you said, sort of Dudley Moore and Peter, their sort of Cook. Another great one, Frank their Thornton, who is the BBC. He's another well-loved sitcom, their legend. They're sort of here, so it's just it's a lovely film as well. I mean, you see all these faces, and it's just in its own the surreal and the sort of chaotic way. It's almost perfect, to be fair. So.
Yeah, and you've seen a lot of influences, not just in the writing, but like the set design and the art design of this film. Like, there's a lot of the post-apocalyptic stuff that you would see in the Mad Max films, in like the costume design. And then I also think there's a lot of, again, we're talking about pythons again, but you see a lot of art design and set design that Terry Gilliam eventually used in his films. Like the homeless camps in The Fisher King remind me a lot of some of the camps that you see in this landfill setting of the bed-sitting room. Like, I think it's just really fascinating to watch films that you've known and appreciated for years, and then see something like this. You're like, oh my god, that had to have been some sort of inspiration. It must have planted the seed somewhere. So yeah, I'm really happy this film is accessible again.
Yeah. And how many times has the cutout TV with just the guy behind it been done? Like
Yeah, I haven't seen one
how many
earlier than
comedies
this.
you've seen it earlier than this?
No, I haven't seen earlier than
Oh,
this.
I was gonna say, but like, I mean, that's something that's been done to death at this point. And I got to, you know, I'm guessing that this is, if not the first, one of the first times that someone thought of such a funny gag.
Yeah.
Just got a guy sitting on the couch and he wants to watch the BBC, so the guy gets on his knees and sticks his head into the TV and he's the BBC. And another thing, there's a lot of social commentary going on in this movie too. You know, something that I had brought up before was that the bed sitting room actually becomes, I don't know if racist is the right term, but he's very concerned about who is allowed in him as the bed sitting room. So there's a lot going on in this movie, and it is like a perfect little movie. It's just a lot of fun, and it's one of those things. Visually, it is stunning to think that most of this movie was shot in an actual dump that had these actors kind of slopping around. One guy's in a puddle more times than I think he's out on dry land. It's just amazing. The story is funny. I don't know. It's one of those things. If you like, I mean, and again, I don't want to go too heavy on the Python references, but like, if you've never seen the movie, but you like the Monty Python style of humor, I mean, this is definitely one to absolutely add to your watch list. Like, no questions about it. And if you're not a fan, you should still add it because it's just a funny movie. It's just a great movie. It's hard to find those perfect little comedies, and this is one that I would say it really is. It's got something for everyone. And if you're not, you know, there's not much of a plot that you have to follow. It's just kind of just a fun way. It's just a bizarre imagining of what would happen after a nuclear war in this apocalyptic wasteland,
where classism still exists.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. So,
well, it's very funny, and I suppose there is a thread going on through the three films. You know, we've had two. I mean, you know, what we are in their sort of Britain, have they been for so long and still are to this day, is actually obsessed with their class, with their social, their sort of class. And we talk about, you know, working class and middle class and upper class. And you see all three in this film. And even after everything's been, you know, blown up, the characters are still obsessed with it. And in a way, it's nice to see that there is a common thread going through the three of their films, is that we're still, you know, talking about that. You know, talking about in the first two films where we're seeing very ordinary characters and seeing how they survive, and in this one, in a very typical their sort of British way, even though there's nothing left. They're the big, the sort of characters. So the upper class ones are still very much obsessed with keeping their sort of place as well. So yeah, so I think I think all three actually fit there sort of together quite sort of nicely.
Yep. We lost Chris again, but
We
at least we're
have
at the end of the show.
we are this time. So just to let the listeners know, and we have sort of mentioned this going through the episode, but this is our second go at doing this, and we were they're sort of beset with all kinds of their sort of technical, their sort of issues on the first one. So thankfully we have reached the end, so that's actually gone quite well. Their sort of Chris has vanished, which is a shame. However, we are just there finishing up. Any last sort of thoughts on the beds, their sitting room?
Yeah, I think we covered it up really well in this conversation. And I think if we were to talk about double features, 'cause I like to talk about double features a lot, I would probably make a double feature out of this film. And then I'd probably pair it with a Mad Max film or another film about post apocalypse. So you'd have like a bright and kind of satirical look on the end of the world. Because let's face it, we are in geopolitical conflicts right now that we don't know where they're going. The news every day just has bad stuff on it of like, okay, are we preparing for war or is this going to blow over? And that's what I like about this film is that it is a world inhabited by people who are just wondering if the conflict was going to blow over. It didn't. The world goes on, and they're just kind of doing their best to continue society as they had before the war. Like, even though it's slightly nonsensical, it does kind of put like a sunny side up on a conflict that is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, very true. I know. So again, like you say, so sort of relevant. Um, who knows? I mean, there are sort of conflicts going on. The threat of the nuclear war is still very much with us. But this deals with it in a very sort of uniquely their sort of British way. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. A good sort of pair, and certainly sort of Mad Max or something like that. A good sort of contrast going on there. Uh, it's been 3 great films. So thank you, Antonio.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I'll look forward to having you on my show very soon. We'll talk about some more cult-worthy classic films. And again, anytime you want me to come back and do this like little potluck style of bringing movies to the table, I always have a great time.
Well, you are very, very welcome. I think we will certainly do something similar there again. I know we did mention um, their sequels, so we can certainly look at cult sequels. I think that would be brilliant as a sequel there to this one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I'm not going to wait for their Chris. Unfortunately, he has vanished, but I will say thank you there to him. And so once again, everyone, I hope you've enjoyed our 3 cult their films, and as always, everyone, thanks for listening. Thank you.